Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul, and in this RedGameTech video we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up over the past 24 or so hours. And by golly gosh, I've missed you all. It's been about a week since I've produced any content for the channel, and it's been really weird for me not to do so. I've really missed actually creating content, and frankly I missed the interactivity with you all. But as many of you know, I have been showing a friend around London. Her and I went to some art galleries, some museums. We kind of did the whole just walk around London and take in the architecture and do the cool touristy stuff. And since then I have flown back with her to Seattle, where I'm going to be spending Christmas with her and several other friends. In the next couple of days I'm going to be going to a shooting range with another friend, where he's going to be showing me how to actually, well, you know, shoot, because I've no idea how to handle real guns, so that's going to be interesting. But first of all, I need to get over this cold and jet lag, which is the reason I'm not on camera, because quite frankly I look like death right now. I developed a cold while I was in London, and it got significantly worse when I flew back to Seattle, so hopefully over the next couple of days that will be gone, and I'll be back to, well, my version of normal. But anyway, enough about that. Let's start things out with the RTX 2060, because that's right, further leaks have occurred with this card. Let's face it, we all know that there was going to be a 2060 in the Turing lineup, but over the last several days a lot of interesting material has leaked, including the most recent leak, which comes to us via Hardware Lux. Andres Schilling, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, managed to gain access to pre-launch marketing materials and decided to plonk them onto the internets via Twitter. I'll link his social media on, of course, the description of this video. Anyway, what we have here is confirmation that these cards are going to be branded the RTX 2060. The fact is, we had already seen a lot of hints that the cards would be named the RTX 2060, including a leaked benchmark, but of course it was pre-production material. We didn't know whether, you know, it was accurate, the benchmark could have been faked, and so on and so on. But it's almost certain right now that indeed these cards will be branded the RTX 2060. And via other leaks, which I believe Amy covered just recently, the cards will indeed have 1920 CUDA cores GDDR6 memory, and that means of course we see 30 ray tracing cores, or if you prefer to look at it from the perspective of tensor cores, 240. Now this is really interesting for a couple of reasons to me. The first is that the full fat RTX 2070 only has 2304 CUDA cores, so it's not that much of a step down from the 2070 to the 2060. Furthermore, if you're thinking about this from a price perspective, the 2070 costs about $500 US. I say about because of course retailers may gouge, and it depends on the model that you're going with, and so on and so on, but roughly $500 US. The 1060 costs $250 US, once again depending on the variant you go for, and the 1070 costs $379 US. But the reason I find the 1070 so interesting is because it has the same number of CUDA cores. It has 1920. So we right there see that the RTX 2060 and the GTX 1070 have the same number of CUDA cores, and I would be shocked, frankly, if we see these cards, that is the 2060s, come in under $300 US. I would not be surprised if Nvidia charges more like $350, $399 US maybe, but $350 is kind of what I'm expecting with a card that features 6GB of GDDR6 memory and 1920 CUDA cores. So what this probably means is that these cards are not going to be really aimed at the value section of the market, and if you think about it, that means that the 1060 is still going to have some life left in it. Indeed, it was only recently that Jensen Huang actually pointed out that we could be looking at up to 2 quarters, half a year essentially, for the mid-range oversupply to be used up, because obviously the cryptocurrency mining craze is now dried up, and that has definitely affected both AMD and Nvidia. Quite frankly, I expected the RTX 2060 to be equipped with significantly fewer CUDA cores, and for Nvidia to really utilize DLSS as the selling point for these cards, in essence cutting the price as much as possible and essentially trying to leverage the marketing of DLSS and say, well, you know, you can run the game at equivalent of 1080p impact in terms of frame rate, but you can get the quality at like 1440p. But judging from what we're seeing here, this is probably not going to be the case. Nvidia almost certainly do not want to cannibalize the sales of the GTX 1060, which makes sense. I mean, because if they have such an oversupply of GTX 1060 and other mid-class Pascal cards, for them to essentially say, well, there's no point now in you buying them, they're just going to basically use those cards as paperweights, because what else can they do? They could just pretty much have to throw them away. And that makes sense, because if they were to release the 2060 at a low price, they would essentially cannibalize the 1060 cards, because who would actually buy a GTX 1060 if it gets significantly outpaced by the 2060? Those cards would basically never be shifted by Nvidia. So the only options I can think of is, one, the 2060 is not meant to replace the 1060 directly, or two, Nvidia are going to drastically cut the price of the 1060 and just try to get rid of them at maybe even a loss. Ultimately though, we're judging all of this without actually seeing any benchmarks, but it does make me wonder how Nvidia are going to battle AMD. There are so many rumors right now concerning Navi and the fact that we're going to see the card at a really low price point, and that from various leaks it's going to be able to compete against the RTX 2070, maybe even the 2080. And of course, with Intel themselves preparing to release their own discrete graphics cards in 2020, it's only a good thing for us as customers, because of course that gives us more choice. And while we're on the subject of Nvidia news, let's talk about the GeForce MX250, which is supposedly an entry-level card for low-power notebooks. And this has actually been leaked from HP and spotted by Momomo on Twitter. Now, according to reports, this card is likely based around Turing and could possibly be using either the TU107 or TU108 graphics chip. Now, there is no specifications for this card, really. All we know is that it has, at least according to the description here, for the HP Zen 66 Pro 14G2 notebook PC. Goodness, that name just rolls off the tongue. Super easy to remember, memorable, catchy, snazzy, great. It comes with either the option for the Nvidia GeForce MX250 with 2GB of GDDR5 dedicated video memory, or just the standard Intel UHD 624 graphics. So obviously there's no mention of number of CUDA cores, of performance or anything like that, but at least we do know that the cards are going to be launched at some point or another. Reasonably, we can say that CES is a likely candidate, or possibly around that point. Although it's possible, in theory, that Nvidia could just do more of a silent launch, based upon the fact that these, of course, are going to be for laptop manufacturers. So it's possible it could be more of a silent launch, and Nvidia just launch it as and when they feel is appropriate. And now let's finish the video with 4 new Xbox consoles. It's a little secret by now that this generation of consoles is drawing to a close. Both Sony and Microsoft have confirmed they're working on successors to their current generation of systems, and Microsoft went even a step further, announcing at E3 that not only were they working on one console, but multiple consoles for the next generation. But according to Brad Sams over at Forrot, and Forrot are well respected generally for pretty accurate Microsoft leaks, we won't just be seeing 1 or 2 new consoles from Microsoft for this next generation, but up to 4 new machines. The first is codenamed Anaconda, and it is said to be the equivalent of the Xbox One X, and its sister is codenamed Lockhart. You can think of this system as like the Xbox One S. So it's going to be less expensive, and it's going to be more aimed at the mainstream. And both of these consoles are set to launch at some point in 2020, at least once again, according to Brad Sams. So this is quite interesting, because it basically means that Microsoft are continuing the 2-tiered approach that Sony are with the PlayStation 4 and the PlayStation 4 Pro, and they currently are for the Xbox and Xbox One X. So the Xbox One X is, of course, the most powerful console currently, so it's going to be interesting to see whether Anaconda can maintain that title when the PlayStation 5 is launched. Anaconda, at least if the rumours are accurate, is being targeted to run games at 4K 60 FPS, and supposedly is going to be using an AMD Zen 2 CPU and some variant of a next generation GPU. On top of those two consoles, the Scarlet systems, we also have another system which is known as Maverick. It is not, I just want to clarify, not part of the Scarlet line, and it is supposedly going to be using a custom AMD Picasso APU. It will launch in spring 2019, at least if the plans continue to hold. Amy did cover this more in depth a day or two ago, but it is going to be aimed at streaming only. It is not going to be playing games locally on the system. Finally, there's going to be yet another revision to the Xbox One S. It's going to be redesigned so it's slimmer, reducing manufacturing costs, and will be also focused on xCloud streaming. But from what the rumours are, it will maintain the traditional disk drive, so it's not going to be diskless itself. This makes some level of sense. After all, even when, let's say, the Xbox One launched, Microsoft kind of had a couple of other revisions and other bits and pieces for the Xbox 360. They still maintained those sales for some time, and with cloud streaming it could be even more profitable for them to take this approach, because of course with streaming the local hardware is less of a big deal. And on top of all of this, Microsoft are supposedly going to be leveraging what is known as Game Core. The idea behind Game Core is that because of all of these different SKUs, they need to make sure that developers have the best time possible porting titles and developing titles for all of the different platforms. So with Game Core, this is supposedly going to be just making things a lot easier for them. I'm actually in two minds of the existence of both Anaconda and Lockhart. In one respect, it's great because it means that you have a cheaper barrier to entry. If you don't want a streaming system, if you don't want to get Maverick, assuming that's going to be, even released, after all, these are still rumours, they're not confirmed, but if you don't want to get Maverick, if you do want to actually have a system which is capable of playing games locally, well, if you don't have the cash to buy Anaconda, or you don't have a 4K capable television, or whatever your reasoning, you can by all means buy Lockhart. I think that's great. But also I still am somewhat unsure how I like the idea of kind of segmenting things from the get-go. It's going to be interesting to see how that works, because let's say by 2022, you can expect developers, at least in theory, would have fully tapped out the power of the Scarlet systems. They did so with the PlayStation 4, they did so with the, even the Xbox One X, which is the world's most powerful console, to use Microsoft's own marketing slogans. Now developers have really pushed it to its maximum, although it does have a couple of issues, such as the fact that the CPUs inside of the consoles that we have now are not as fast as maybe what they should have been. The Jaguars are just, well, the weakest link of the current generation of systems by, any measure you can possibly imagine. The other factor we've got to consider here, though, is it depends really on what Microsoft are doing with the games. And yes, it's a broken record thing to go back to the games, but since Microsoft have acquired so many studios recently, and rumours that they are going to be acquiring many more, in theory at least, the first party lineup of games for the Xbox most likely won't be the issue. So I'm just hoping that this early segmentation of the market is not going to be an issue. Of course, it does depend upon pricing and so much more besides. Microsoft are clearly keen to not repeat mistakes from this generation of Xbox. They don't want people to continuously point out that they don't have a strong first-party lineup of games, which it's very hard to argue has been one of the Achilles heels of this generation for Microsoft. But they also most likely don't want the problem of having a significantly more expensive console than their competition, and that's most likely why Lockhart is being developed. After all, the Xbox One, when it first launched, not only was weaker spec-wise than the PlayStation 4, but it also was more expensive, thanks to the inclusion of Kinect. So Microsoft most likely want to make the barrier to entry for the Xbox platform as cheap as possible. All of this sounds great, but we don't know what Sony are planning really for the PlayStation 5, both in terms of specifications and, of course, the lineup of games. So it's going to be really interesting when these systems launch over the next couple of years. With all of that said, hopefully you've enjoyed the videos. Normal stuff, like, share, comment and subscribe. And hopefully I'll be back on camera in the next couple of days after I no longer feel like I'm dying from a plague. With all of that said, take care of yourselves. Bye for now.